get started.
Last time I told you that I would open this class with an opportunity for you to ask questions. If you had any questions or concerns from what we did last time, anyone have any questions, concerns, comments from the last class? I think Dr. Briggs had something he wanted to share with you.
Yes, so we
Work
were
that
talking
he'd done
about
with WIDE.
the age of youth in facilities. And there was a point in time in my career when I was a director of a large YMCA at Georgia. And Georgia had changed their state laws in regards to the age of liability in facilities. And so when that happened in the early 1990s, all the YMCA's throughout the state of Georgia got together and set a standard policy that our new age limit would be 14 and up. And we used to do an age that we would do from 12 to 16 permission by parents, and 16 and up was the new age. When the state changed their laws, that was something, because it was the insurance companies that contacted us. We got together as Y leaders and basically followed the guidelines of the insurance recommendations. And we set the policy that in the fitness center, all the weights, the aerobics, all of those particular areas, you had to be 14 or up, and there was no more parental permission for anything less than that. And there was, I think, a certain waiver they had to sign. But the stuff like tennis and aerobics and swimming and pool, that was still, there was a different set of age categories for that. But particularly because I think insurance companies were being sued more often in this arena in the fitness centers for younger kids getting harmed and hurt. And so this was kind of a proactive approach when the insurance companies came to us. We set that standard and then we had to advertise it. So we had to pour some money into advertising that throughout all the Ys and all the systems. And it took a couple of years to take hold. But that was driven directly by insurance carriers, which was probably driven by litigation. So those kind of things, sometimes recommendations come down from your national industry organizations. So in the health and fitness industry, we have certain professional associations like the MFA and the Medical Fitness Association, or ACSM in sports medicine, or the YMCA had their own national kind of organizing body, and so they had a governing board over aquatics, like Dr. Johnson, who used to be here. He sat on the national board for aquatics. Well, they would make policy and procedure for aquatics and pass it down to all the Ys internationally, and they have a group for tennis and a group for, and so a lot of times you either have professional associations that set those for you, or you have a governing body that hands those down to you. And it's always good to be connected with those and to follow those recommendations, because generally then you have the support of your industry. When you develop your conditioning protocols or your facility guidelines in adherence to, it looks well upon the insurance folks and the public, when you're adhering to the guidelines given to you by the professionals, and it actually looks very bad upon you when you deviate from that, particularly in corporate settings.
Yeah. If you stay with those recommended standards, those it's commonly referred to as industry standards.
Yeah.
And if you stay with those, then you've got the industry behind you when you go to court. If you have to go to court, but if you don't have that, then you're out there by yourself. And actually, the plaintiff's attorney can take industry standards and use them against you if you are not consistent with industry standards. So, Dr. Briggs mentioned a couple of three things there. One, he talked about industry standards. Two, he talked about state legislation. The state says that the age will be 14. Okay, if the state says the age is 14, set your policy at age 14. You've got the state law behind you on it. And the other one was looking at industry standards,
Professional
state
governing,
law.
like your larger governing
Yeah.
body. Yeah.
So you've got a lot of things to look at on this. It's not just running out there and doing what you think looks good and what works for you necessarily. You've got to consider all these other things. And unfortunately, we're in a society that's prone to sue And what individuals are looking for is they're looking for someone that they can blame for an injury and receive compensation. I'm sorry, bottom line, that's the way it is. It happens all the time. And with us, in our professions, fitness, physical education, sports, athletics, we're in an area where there's activity and there's, just by its nature, there's an increased possibility of individuals having an accident, someone being injured. And so we're more prone to some of these things than others are. Anything else anyone wants to add? Any questions or anything? Okay, I'm gonna jump into this. What I was asked to look at today was facility design considerations for you. And I'm gonna talk about some components of facility design in a broad sense for just a little bit at the beginning here, and then we'll try to get into some more specific things related to strength facilities, physical activity facilities, these kinds of things. And again, it's going to be some broad ideas. I want to give you some numbers that you can possibly work with on this. But again, you need to take this information and apply it to your specific situation. In some cases, you're going to walk into a facility that's already there. That's what you're going to be dealing with. You have to work with it. You have to make it work. So you see things that look good, things that work. You're going to see things that are not well designed, things that need to be changed. In some cases, you may be able to make some changes. In some cases, you may not. You've got to deal with that situation. Some of you may be fortunate enough to have an opportunity to actually be involved in the design process for a new facility or the renovation of an existing facility. So you can incorporate some good ideas. Maybe make some changes that'll make it safer, more usable, provide more flexibility, aesthetic quality, all those things. So take these things into consideration, kind of file them back there somewhere and have them, and whenever you need them, have the opportunity to use them, you can pull them up. So if we get started with this, let's look at some basic components for facility planning. Now this is the broad piece, okay? This is the broad piece. We're not going to be specific here. We're going to work down from this. There's three things here I want you to think about on this. One is looking at facility requirements. So anytime you're designing a facility or renovating a facility, look at facility requirements. Facility requirements, what do you need? What are you going to have? What's the purpose of this new facility or renovating an existing facility? So you need to start somewhere, so you need to know about the requirements. Second thing, just as important, program needs. What type of programs will you be using this new facility for, this renovated facility? What are the program needs? And get down to the brass tacks on this. Don't just kind of gloss over and say, well, we're going to do a little this, a little that, maybe something else. Know what you're going to use it for. What are the program needs? And the last one, this functional analysis, that's when you take the information that you collected and you put it together to come up with a design that will meet your needs for the programs that you want to bring into this facility. Now, I don't care what you're doing. If you're designing a facility, you need to take at least these three things into consideration. So if we start from that, and then we look at identifying needs, are there specific site requirements? Is there anything specific that you need? Site requirement. Maybe there's a location that you need. Maybe there's a certain design that you need. Maybe you need to consider the surrounding facilities, support amenities, anything like that. But are there specific site requirements? Identify those. Second thing here, gather technical data relative to the proposed facility. And that's becoming increasingly important because we're becoming more of a technologically enhanced society. There's so much we do now with technology. It can control everything. It can control our lights. It can control our heat. It can control communication. It can control access. It can control identification of users, times, all those things that's in there. So consider that. Consider the technology as it relates to the facility. Also, looked at, minimum, data that you need, the size of actual dimensions and buffer area. What's the size we need? How much square footage do you need? And on that, one of the things we often forget if we're looking at designing, exercise facilities, strength and conditioning facilities, is we look at the space that's required for a piece of equipment, but we forget traffic flow, and we forget buffer space, safety zones. You gotta figure that in too. We'll talk more about that a little bit later. Any grade requirements, and what we're looking at here primarily is maximum height, minimum height, width, things like that. We'll talk about that. For example, if you're designing or renovating a strength and conditioning area, what should be the minimum height for the ceiling? Maybe you come up with a space in a basement somewhere and say, oh, we'll renovate this and we'll make this a strength and conditioning center, but it only has an 8-foot ceiling. Is that gonna be adequate? Answer is no, it's not. You need more than that. So you come up with these, get this information. Specific construction requirements. What, in terms of construction, if you are designing or renovating a facility for strength and conditioning, and you're looking at construction, strength and conditioning now, what is one of the things that you should really think about in terms of construction requirements that would be out of the norm? What about the walls? Can you get by with pretty much your normal norms of walls? What about the ceiling? What about the floor? Yeah, why?
Can we drop in heavy weight?
There you go. Now, that's one of the things the average person probably wouldn't think about that. But you should think about, okay, man, we're gonna have weight in here. We're gonna have a lot of weight in here. So yeah, we can do something with the walls, the kind of standard thing on the walls, the ceiling maybe, but that floor is gonna have to be able to support, the recommendation, I think, is about 150 pounds per square foot should be the minimum on the support for the floor. I saw a facility that was used as strength and conditioning. It wasn't designed for that, but there was a large open space, and someone came in and says, oh man, that'll make a great strength and conditioning area. We're gonna move machines and weights and stuff in there. And they moved them in, and these big athletes are coming in, they're lifting weights, and they're dropping weights on the floor. And one day someone said, whoa, wait a minute, we got a problem downstairs. I'm not kidding you, downstairs. That cinder block wall that was there, that normally was great and wonderful, they went down and looked, and that cinder block wall below where they were lifting those weights and dropping those weights, that cinder block wall had shifted. It's like, whoa, wait a minute, what's going on here? So their answer was, okay, cosmetically, what we're gonna do is we're gonna come in and build a false wall over that and cover it up. And then somebody said, we better move this up here, so they moved it to another location. It wasn't designed to handle the weight. So that's one of the things people typically wouldn't think about, but man, you need to think about all that weight that you're gonna have in there on that. Utility needs. You know, the utilities that you're gonna be using in there, what are you gonna do with it?
We experienced that very issue here, probably about 10 or so years ago. When we, when we built our first strength and conditioning center in athletics. We built it above on the second floor, above the athletic offices, which that room was always used for storage. Then we cleaned it out and we put some heavy-duty rubberized flooring in there, thinking that 3/4 rubber would be enough. Well, after a couple of years of deadlifting and the snatch and clean and just really dropping thousands of pounds of weight, we started to break through the ceiling, not realizing that we did not reinforce that underpinning when we put all that facility up there. That actually forced us to go out and raise money to build the current strength and conditioning center that we have. So we didn't expect that, those who were organizing and managing that.
We saw the space.
Yeah. Also, at the Y that I was director at, we converted at one point in time a racquetball court, not a racquetball court, back then it was a handball court, into a powerlifting room. And if you remember, those old racquetball and handball courts were made out of paneling. And so when we converted that, we didn't think about not so much dropping the weights on the floor, but dumbbells would roll, where folks would lean those 50 and 100-pound plates against the wall, and I remember one time, they kept leaning them in the same spot, and it broke through the panel, and had this big hole in the wall. And because those were hollow, they were just panels in a hollow wall, and so we had to patch that up. But experiences like that teach you these particular items.
Take those things to heart and kind of remember that, and if you're building a new facility or renovating a facility, something like that, think about these things, because if you're looking at strength and conditioning, you're dealing with weights and machines and all those kind of things, it's different. The environment's gonna be different, and you need to design accordingly for that. This utility thing, I'm gonna give you one on that, and you've probably seen this thing too. You end up with, for example, you end up with a cardiovascular piece of equipment that requires electricity. And you say, okay, where are we gonna put it? Well, we'll put it over here. Okay, so you set it up somewhere, maybe that's a good location, maybe it fits and everything, but then where's the electrical outlet? There's no electrical outlet, so the answer is, okay, we'll have to run an extension cord. So you run an extension cord across the floor. Oh my gosh, we got a legal issue or legal concern here because that's a trip hazard. Okay, so what are we gonna do now? We'll put a piece of tape over it so to try to minimize the trip hazard on it. It's still there, it's still an issue. But again, think about it, and we'll talk about this in just a minute, the different areas that you'll have within a strength conditioning facility. Again, it goes back to this idea, what are you gonna use it for? If you know that you're gonna have machines or pieces of equipment in there that are gonna need electricity, plan for those electrical outlets to be installed where you need them. And not get into this thing where you have good space to use, but it doesn't have the support in terms of utilities that you need. I've seen that over and over and over again. And it happens all the time. And everybody, okay, that's fine, we'll just run an extension cord. You're asking for trouble on that. So next thing, if we look at this, I'm trying to keep up with you here. Develop a checklist for you, a check sheet. And this may sound kind of honky to you, no, we don't need a check sheet, I know what we've done. No, go ahead as you're putting this information together, develop a check sheet of everything that's a concern for you, things that you need to consider, and make sure you use this check sheet and go through it and take care of business as it comes up. Here are some things that you might want to include on that check sheet. As a matter of fact, I would suggest if you have the opportunity to build a new facility or renovate an existing facility, use all of these. Look at such things as vehicular and pedestrian circulation. Vehicular, if you have people driving in, they're gonna park, where they're gonna park, and if they park, how they get to the facility. You wanna make sure that happens in a safe manner. The other thing is look at pedestrian circulation, people coming and going to the facility, and also pedestrian circulation within the facility. You look at the flow patterns of individuals within your facility. Activity configuration, indoor, outdoor. You may not have any outdoor, it may be strictly indoor, but you may be in a situation where you also have some outdoor space that you could use for certain types of activities for strength and conditioning. So look at that in terms of how you locate, where you locate those particular activities within the facility and or outside the facility. The types of surfaces used. Dr. Briggs has already mentioned one, putting down the rubber tiles on the floor to absorb the impact of the weights, also try to reduce some of the noise. It becomes an acoustical issue. But what type of surfaces will you need? The floor is probably your biggest concern, but don't forget your walls and don't forget your ceilings. He gave you a good example there of converting a handball court into a weightlifting area and people eventually not going to hold the wall with plates. That's not going to hold up. So if you're going to have a facility like that, consider the surfaces. You want those surfaces to be durable. You want them to be easy to maintain. You also want them to be attractive. Auxiliary facilities to the main activity area. Auxiliary facilities are those other things that you will have in addition to that strength and conditioning area. Now, what kind of auxiliary areas, facilities would you expect to have associated with the strength and conditioning facility? It's not a difficult question, guys. You go into a gym, what else is there other than the gym?
Like basketball?
Not basketball court.
Tell them, Zach, think about your weight room you're lifting now. What else is in there?
You guys are gonna kick yourselves when you get this answer. It's so simple. It's so simple, you take it for granted. You don't even think about it. It's there and you don't even think about it. Restrooms.
That's right there.
Water fountain.
Water fountain, restroom,
What
locker
else?
room,
Locker room, and what goes with your locker rooms?
shower.
Showers.
Yeah.
That's what I'm talking about, auxiliary areas. Think about
Laundry
those.
facilities.
What,
Laundry facilities, so like if you offer
if
towel
you have
service.
laundry facilities would fit in there, what did you guys leave out? What did you leave out? This is the one that you don't think about, but I'll guarantee you, if you're working in a facility, it's gonna hit you almost immediately. Storage
Storage.
space. Now, that's a little more difficult, and I'll tell you why, because storage space is one of those things you don't think about until you need it. And a lot of times when the facilities are being designed, you get all these other things, that, oh gosh, need to put these amenities in there, we need a locker room, we have a locker room, we need showers, we need an office space for individuals. We need toilets, restrooms, you don't think about storage space. So storage space becomes one of those amenities as well, and please put that in your head here, and whenever you start looking at facilities, renovation, designing new facilities, make sure that storage space goes in there. And usually what happens is, you think you might have enough storage space, but you run out pretty quickly. And you need to designate storage space for different uses. For example, in a strength and conditioning facility, you may need storage space for equipment. Store extra weights, things like that. You may also need to store machines. So you need to consider the size of the doors, getting stuff in and out. You need to consider a loading dock, because some of these pieces of equipment will be heavy. You get a piece of equipment weighs several thousand pounds, and you're gonna move it in, and truck shows up, and they unload it at the front door, and there it sits, and now you gotta figure out how you're gonna move that piece of equipment from the front door, if you can get it into the facility, maybe through a 36-inch door or something like that. How's it gonna work? So think about that. You're gonna be moving equipment, heavy equipment in these things, so think about stuff like that. Signage, to provide instructions, safety procedures, directional signage, all those things, put the signage. Think about that. You're gonna need signage in there. And put instructional information there. Again, if you're gonna provide instructional classes, you need it for that, but also instruction on how to use equipment or where the equipment is that you want to use, these kinds of things. Barriers to control the users and for security. Now, what we're talking about here on barriers are not barriers like big chain link gates or anything like that. Just the layout of the facility so you can control the flow of individuals and have them to move in the direction and to the areas you want them to be in, and to keep them out of areas that you do not want them to be in. So consider that as well. Utilities, power, electric power, water, sewage, communications as a minimum. All those things you need to bring in. If there's anything else you need, for example, gas is not on here, I guess we could, well, we don't have utilities there, do we? But if you're using gas, you have access to gas lines. All those things, start looking at that. So these are some general things that you can think about here as you're designing a facility. The needs, you want to plan the facility to meet the needs of the individuals who are going to be using the facility. And several of you in here are athletes, so you're going to be looking at a strength and conditioning facility that's primarily going to serve athletes. What kind of athletes? Okay, we have football players, we have baseball players, we have basketball players, we have soccer, we have lacrosse. Oh, by the way, we also have men and women. So who's going to be using the facility? You're gonna use the same type of exercise program for football that you would use for baseball. So you look at these things and you take that into consideration. That's if you're only working with athletics. But think about this, you're not working with athletics, but you're out here in the community and you're working with a local gym. And you're taking people off the street. And if any of you have been in one of those gyms and just observe the people that come in, you will have individuals who come in who are in very poor physical condition and they want to get back in shape. You have individuals that are interested in developing strength. You have individuals that are interested in developing cardiovascular endurance. And then you have this other group that comes in, which are the lifters, the big bulky, usually guys, but there'll be a few women that have come in. They're looking for something different. So how do you design a facility to meet the needs of the individual you want to serve? It's not always an easy process. You guys are working with athletics, you may think, well, it's really easy, we just design a gym and it'll meet everybody's needs. Not necessarily. So you need to look at that. What are the needs of the individual that you want to serve? The list of the activities, again, that the facility is going to accommodate, the facilities that are needed for each type of activity. Strength versus cardiovascular. If you look at a strength and conditioning facility, strength versus cardiovascular, it's two examples of different needs that you'll have on that. Peak participant load. How many people will be participating in these activities at the same time? How many people can you accommodate? And design for that number. And you may also look at the peak number of individuals that would be in that entire facility at one time. So you may have, again, individuals that are interested in developing strength and individuals interested in cardiovascular. So it's two different groups, two different ideas. How do you do that? Size of the facility, come up with what you would consider the ideal size of the facility. What would be the ideal size of the facility? Now, the reason you want to start with that is as you get into the money issue, the cost of building a new facility or renovating existing facility, that dollar figure is going to hit you. And you may have to back off on that a little bit. So what would you really want? What would be the ideal size? Well, we can't afford that, so we're going to back off a little bit. How much can you back off and still get what you need? Downsize a little bit maybe. Or if the money's really there, man, let's build a Taj Mahal here of exactly what we need. Have an idea what you need. Look at the relationship of the activities and the facilities. What we're looking at here is coexistence in a facility of more than one activity. Another way of putting this is multiple use. Can you design for multiple use? What happens if the needs of the users change and suddenly there's a shift from, let's say, keep it simple here, there's a shift from an emphasis on strength, developing strength, to an emphasis on cardiovascular, and you find out that the people that you're serving are more interested in cardiovascular and less interested in developing strength. And you have all these strength areas set up here, but they're not getting used that much, but you look and you've got a backlog of individuals trying to get into the cardiovascular area. What are you going to do? You want to make some changes to utilize that facility. Plan for some flexibility. Be able to shift as needs change, as interest changes. And it's not really something that's going to happen every few weeks. That's going to take time for that to occur for these individuals to show up and be there, and you see these interests change, but be prepared for some changes on that. Next thing, all we've done now is just collected information. That's all we've done is okay, we're going to build a new facility, we're going to renovate an existing facility here. We've collected information. We know where we want to go, we know what we need, we know what we're planning on doing. Now we're going to put it together and see what it looks like. This is where the functional analysis comes in. This is where we bring all the information we have, we put it together, and we're going to come up with a graphic design, layout, something that shows us where we can see how all these pieces fit together. This is important because one of the big things I think about when we look at this is, okay, one of the things that we need, we've decided one of the things that we need in here is we need a cardiovascular area. That's one of the components that we want to include in this strength and conditioning facility. How many bicycles do we need? How many step machines do we need? How many recumbent bikes do we need? How many treadmills do we need? And where are we gonna put them? And each one of those pieces of equipment will require square footage. How much square footage will each one require? Now, as a manufacturer, you can get specifications on the footprint of that piece of equipment, and they'll tell you, okay, you need X number of square feet for this piece of equipment. They may or may not tell you or give you a recommendation for buffer space around that piece of equipment, but you still need to make sure that you include that. There's flow patterns, safety zone around that piece of equipment, so it's eating up square footage. So as you start putting this thing together, you can see how much space that you're gonna need for these various pieces of equipment, various stations that you might have. So this graphic symbols will help you understand that process. By the way, if you get with an architect or someone to help you plan this thing out, it's a simple process now because they can do it on a computer, they can use a CAD program, and they can pull up a treadmill. Treadmill requires X number of square feet, and take that little rectangle and stick it in somewhere, and you can see how much space it takes. They put this thing together real easy. Moves things around, reorganize and stuff like that. Establish the ideal preferred physical relationship of all components of the program. Put them all together, project program components. This is gonna be the area where you're gonna have your exercises and so forth. But then again, where are your dressing rooms, where's your office space, where's your storage space, all these things, and you can start seeing how those fit together as well. Develop a flow chart, or a flow diagram that indicates user circulation. You wanna know how the individuals are coming in, how you can direct them without telling them where to go. Show them where to go, signage is there, you have something that directs them where you want them to go. And also exit. Entrance and exit, controlling them while they're in there. You can control without them knowing by using directional on the signage. Functional analysis, you want to look at space diagrams, relationship charts or diagrams between different pieces of equipment and different aspects of your program. If you're really interested in this, you can use what you call a bubble diagram. Bubble diagrams are kind of interesting because let's say that you have an area here, you want to have strength, you want to have cardiovascular, and you want to have circuit or machines with adjustable weight limits. Three different things, okay? How those relate together. Okay, so we've got that aspect of it, but then we also have locker rooms, we have restrooms, we have office space, we have storage space, a bubble for each one of those. How do they relate? And you put those bubbles down and link them together and see how they relate to each other. Now that doesn't give you an absolute diagram, but it shows you the relationship of different components of the facility. It's kind of an interesting way to do it. It's kind of a fun thing too, because you could move those bubbles around on that. If there's any specific land use considerations, that needs to come into play as well on this. So these are some general things that we're looking at for any facility, but you can take these and apply them to a strength and conditioning facility. So let's look at some specific things relative to strength and conditioning. I've labeled as physical fitness and exercise facilities. What do we need to do with that? The space should be specifically designed for its intended purpose. Exercise, physical training, physical wellness activities, exactly what you want to do with this facility.
Okay.
What's the purpose of this? Okay, so you take that into consideration. Should include space for locker rooms, showers, toilets, office space, general storage. We've already talked about that. But you need to make sure that that's there. Don't forget the storage. People overlook that. Don't forget it. Make sure that the facility as you're planning it meets all safety codes, health and safety codes. industry standards and all laws and regulations referring to this type of facility. Now, you may not have all that information. If you can get a consultant to help you with this, that would be good. If you're designing a new facility and you're bringing in an architect, architects are supposed to know these things or have staff members on their architectural firm that know these things that can kind of keep you straight. One of the big things that you're going to be hit with, and we'll talk about it a little bit later, is ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act. That's going to hit you. You may not even know what it is. You may not be aware that it exists, but it's out there and it's real, and you're going to have to deal with it. When we talk about auxiliary facilities, what we want to focus on is we want to focus on the facilities that relate to strength and conditioning or physical fitness and exercise facilities. That's what we're after. Now be careful on this, because this last thing I have here, you don't want to get into this thing of using what was referred to as high bay court games such as basketball and volleyball. That's not what we're looking at here. If you get into that, you're getting into something else. Hot tubs, saunas, steam rooms, swimming pools, those are different animals. You're going to have different requirements when you start looking at those things on this, especially when you get into swimming pools. Swimming pool, unless you just really, really, really want to go there, stay away from the swimming pools. They can be a nightmare for you. I mean, and you're probably going to regret the day you got into them. They're fun, people like them, but to really manage one, they're a nightmare. This next one, food preparation. If you're going to serve food, that's a whole new ballgame. You don't want to mix that with this. Focus on what you're after here. If you go with these other things, the last thing we have here is service and sporting goods retails. That's a different animal too. The requirements for these things are going to be different from what you're looking for with a strength and conditioning facility. Now, having said that, if you want to design a facility that's more encompassing, and you want to have your strength and conditioning facility, but you think, okay, we're going to do that, and people who come are going to be interested in strength and conditioning and improving their physical conditioning and so forth, and part of that is nutrition and diet. So we also want to include a food service area, or food preparation area, a food sales area. You can do that, but know that you're going to be dealing with something different. The construction process, the renovation process for that type of facility is going to be different than what you're looking at with strength and conditioning. So I'm going to focus on just the strength and conditioning aspect of it and kind of stay with that to keep things simple. Space types. If you're not familiar with this, you probably are. There's 4 different spaces or space types or categories that you should consider when you're looking at a strength and conditioning facility. One is going to be an area for warm up and cool down. Sometimes that's overlooked. You assume that they just find a little spot somewhere, do the warm-up activities, do the cool-down activities, but you should provide space for that. Second thing is you're going to have your free weight area. Yeah, we're all familiar with the free weight area on that. Another one is going to be circuit training. This is usually where you'll have your machines where you can adjust the weight, have stacked weights. You can just pull a pin, adjust the weight, use those. Those things are great if individuals don't want to handle those free weights. And then the 4th area you have is cardiovascular. Usually what we think in terms of, when we think in terms of this space, is free weights, your machine area, and your cardiovascular. The requirements are going to be different in these in terms of space requirements, controlling user flow, traffic flow in those areas, but you need to remember that you have at least those if you're working with it. For each one of these, you need to consider the needs for those areas. Look at the space that you need. How much space do you need for free weights? Whether you're doing a bench or a squat or whatever you're doing, how much space do you need? Also, you're going to use your tall machines for your free weight area as well. How much space do you need for those? How much space do you need for your circuit training or your weight machines? How much space do you need for those? The idea behind those was to have a concentrated weight lift area that individuals could travel around and do different types of exercises, strength exercises, in one confined area. Really a neat idea. It eliminates the need for free weights. Some people really like it, usually individuals who are just getting started in weight training, something like that, will work with those. But then individuals that are hardcore are gonna go more to the free weights on that. So you look at that. So how much space do you need cardiovascular? How much space do you need for a treadmill as opposed to a recumbent bike, as opposed to a stepper? How much space do you need? You gotta make a decision on how many of those you need. Utilities, we've talked a little bit about that. Will you need utilities in those areas? For example, if you're running cardiovascular machines that require electricity, where's your electrical outlets on that? HVAC, this is your air handling system, this is your heating and cooling, and air circulation, how much we need, where we need it. You need concentrated in some areas more than others. Circulation refers to the flow of individuals in the area, allowing adequate space for individuals to move from one station in the system to another. And you may have individuals who will do some work on the machines and circuit training for a little bit, and then they may go over and do some cardiovascular or vice versa. So depending on what their need is and how they want to set it up. And then the last point that I have here is control. Again, controlling the individuals as they move from one station to another, as they move in and out of the area that you have set up for your strength and conditioning. On this, these are things that you need to consider on that. Some additional design considerations when you're looking at these areas. You need to look at the surfaces, the finishes that you have. We usually focus on the floor, but you also need to focus on the walls and the ceiling as well on that. But again, that floor becomes very important. Look at flexibility of space. We've already talked about that. As needs change, do you have some degree of flexibility in terms of moving machines, enlarging an area, decreasing the size of another area, those kind of things? Can you do that? And the last one here is one we don't think about a lot of times. What about acoustical control? What about the sound in an area? Working out, if a strength conditioning center can get loud, is there anything that you can do to help control the noise in that area? There may be some areas where you want it a little quieter, some areas where you're gonna have more noise. For example, if you're lifting free weights, probably gonna be a little bit noisier in that area, whereas if you're doing cardiovascular, individuals, it's gonna be a little bit quieter in that area. So take that into consideration as well. Accessibility to the facility. Now, start out, the first thing you're going to see here is ADA consideration. Now, the interesting thing about ADA considerations, yeah, you may be impacted by this. Chances are you are going to be impacted by this. But a lot of people will look at that and say, well, I'm just doing this to accommodate individuals with special needs, Americans with Disabilities Act, individuals with disabilities, even though that's not a very acceptable term. But we're doing all this just for those people. Actually, if you make the changes to accommodate individuals with disabilities, it will also provide a better atmosphere for all your users. For example, you may have to put a ramp in. Well, you put the ramp in for wheelchairs. Well, why do you need a wheelchair? I can walk up and down the steps. If you can walk up and down the steps, you can walk up and down the ramp. So really, it's not just for people with disabilities. If you do it properly, everybody can benefit from it as well. So take that positive view of meeting the requirements for ADA as opposed to a less positive view of we're just doing this for a small group of individuals. If you look at your facility, if your facility is considered for public accommodations, then it's covered by ADA and you must be compliant with ADA. Now the thing about it is, if you build a new facility, in the design process you need to design to accommodate for ADA requirements. If you're renovating an existing facility and it fits under the category of public accommodations, you must take into consideration ADA regulations. And if you have an existing facility and you're not doing anything with it, and listen carefully on this because I don't want you to get the wrong idea. If you have an existing facility and you're not making any changes in it, and that facility is not compliant with ADA, unless you just want to, you do not have to do anything to make it compliant with ADA. Here's the catch, until someone complains about it not being compliant with ADA. At that point, you must make those changes. So you'll see facilities that are, if you really check them, they're not compliant with ADA. But no one's complained, so no one's been forced to make any changes. But if you build a new one, yes. If you renovate an existing one, yes. So again, if you run into a facility that's not compliant with ADA, and say, well, look at these restrooms, you know, you can't get a wheelchair in these restrooms. It's not considered public accommodation, so we don't have to do anything about it. No one's complained, so why should we do it? I worked in an institution one time where they had classes on the second floor. One of the main classroom areas on campus was on the second floor of the building. Student comes in a wheelchair, they can't get to it. Everything's fine, went on for years, and finally the student came in a wheelchair and says, I can't get to my class. But what, well, that's tough, you know, we gotta do something about this. So immediately they had to go to work and come up with some way to accommodate that individual. And what they did was they actually moved the class that he was in, they actually found another place on campus and moved it to another facility where he could get into the classroom while they worked out a way of putting an elevator in an old building so that all students and staff and faculty could get from one floor to the other without having to take the stairs. So everything was fine until someone raised the question and we had to change it. You look at ADA, it not only requires access to the facility, and that's usually as far as people think. You have access to the facility, okay, we're compliant with ADA, no. You also, I need to make sure that the individual also has access to the exercise equipment and all the programs and the policies in place within the facility do not discriminate against an individual with disabilities. So there's more to it than just getting in the facility. Once they're in the facility, they have to have access to the equipment, to the programs, and the policies, so that they can do whatever they want to do with those facilities. Public accommodations pertains to the architecture, policy, practices, and other accommodation requirements. Here we go, here's a number you can play with. ADA requires a 12-inch ramp if you have an elevation in the facility of over 1/2 inch. So if you have a change in level of floor from one area to another area, over 1/2 inch, you have to have a ramp in there, at least 12 inches on there. Now, the other thing about it is that you're gonna have to put a ramp in there for 1/2 inch. I can step over 1/2 inch, that won't bother me. 1/2 inch is also a trip hazard. If you don't step over that and you trip over it, that's a trip hazard. And by putting that ramp in there, you're eliminating that trip hazard, but at the same time, you're providing a ramp to make it easier for an individual with a wheelchair. Now, I'm gonna throw some numbers out here that you can take these down if you want to, but the other thing is, this is barely the tip of the iceberg when you get into looking at ADA and their specific requirements. This is where you need to have someone who is well-versed in ADA requirements to make sure that you get all these things taken care of. Doorways, pathways, a minimum of 36 inches wide, so that the individuals with special needs can get through. And we usually look at wheelchairs and being able to get wheelchairs in. You go into the restrooms on this campus, any new ones we have, you'll notice that the stalls are larger and have larger doors. Also notice that those doors open out rather than opening in on this. If you go into the facilities on this campus where you have old restrooms, you will see where they have retrofitted existing stalls in the bathrooms to accommodate individuals in wheelchairs. It's ADA. Doors and pathways, designed minimum of 36 inches. Light switches, emergency equipment must be accessible to individuals with disabilities, so you don't put them too high on the wall where they can't reach them. It's another ADA requirement. Signage, any signage that you have that's designed for the users to provide information to them, direction, instructions, whatever, needs to be usable for individuals that are visually impaired. We don't have a problem when you see the signs on the door. I see one back here on the door, mask up, please. It's high on the door. If I'm coming in, I'm visually impaired, I probably never will see that. And if there's nothing there that, it's not raised letter or anything, if it was there so I could see it or feel it or whatever. So little things like that. Access to the facility, these are some of the things that's included in that. You have parking spaces and accommodations, and there are regulations relative to the number of parking spaces and where they have to be located if you bring individuals in that have disabilities. That's a whole different ballgame. You can get into that if you need to. On that ramps, the use of ramps, both interior and exterior. The exterior ramps, if you're a facility's elevated, you need to have ramps to get them in. There's some ramps on campus. You'll notice a few of them. Some of those are probably closed, but I'm not sure they're right at ADA requirement on that, but they tried. Interior and exterior doors, location and size of those doors, and how you open and close those doors. Automatic openers on those is one. Elevators, if you have elevators. Locker rooms, you're going to be dealing with locker rooms problems, so making sure that the locker rooms will accommodate individuals with disability. Restrooms, public restrooms as well as restrooms for your users. Drinking fountains, again, another one. Access around exercise equipment, we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Access to exercise equipment. There are special pieces of exercise equipment that's designed for individuals with disabilities, a variety of disabilities. So if you're going to be dealing with individuals with disabilities, or you're going to expect individuals with disabilities to come into your facility, you need to provide those pieces of equipment. Not a lot. If you need a place where an individual can do bench press, move from wheelchair to a bench and do bench presses, one area with extra space will probably do it for you on that. You're probably not going to have that many, but you need to be prepared for them if you do. User pathways in the facility, wide enough areas so people in wheelchairs, individuals with disabilities can move around the different spaces, different areas that you have in the facility, and also that they can gain access to the different pieces of equipment that you have. So all these things relate to accessibility. Floor surfaces, you need to make sure that floor surfaces are slip resistant. This is common sense, but again, you need to make sure that people don't slip on your floors. If you have a situation like that, you're going to have injuries and you're going to have lawsuits. Some ways of doing this is the use of certain types of floor surfaces. I've listed 4 up here that are commonly used on this. A lot of times that rubber tile is good. Also that cork engineered floating planks works pretty good in some cases. But the other thing, again, go back to that requirement of the weights and what type of flooring will handle that weight in a weight room situation on that. But again, slip resistance to protect individuals, all individuals. Provide adequate and required signage to inform users of accessible routes, equipment location, and classes if you have classes scheduled. This is where your signage comes in. And again, that signage needs to be there for all individuals, including those with disabilities, i.e. visual impairments. Another interesting thing too, we don't think about a lot of times, is individuals with hearing impairments. You may have an alarm system in your facility that will go off, if, for example, the fire alarm will go off and people hear the alarm when they exit the facility. What about an individual who's hearing impaired? They can't hear the alarm, so how do you get the attention of an individual who has a hearing impairment? You take that into consideration. So think about these things. Again, having an architect that knows what he or she's doing, having consultants that will help you make some of these decisions is good. Must be designed to be usable, signage must be designed to be usable by individuals with visual impairments. Only makes sense. Pedestrian flow patterns, some things here. Around the perimeter of the exercise area, you need to have at least 36 inches of clear space. This will allow an individual to move around and have plenty of space to move around. If you have an area where you're going to have heavy usage, it's recommended to go up to about 60 inches, that's about 5 feet of open space, so individuals can pass each other in that space in a heavily used area. So think in terms of having at least 3 feet between everything. So you have adequate room for flow patterns in there. Now with that 36 inches, we just took up another chunk of space in your facility. You say, well, wait a minute, if we take 36, what if we just squeeze that down to 24 we can gain a foot here, we can do that 3 or 4 times, I can put another machine in. Okay, you've got another machine, but what you've created now is, it's not a very safe flow pattern for individuals, and it's not gonna meet industry standards. So again, as you do the planning, how much space do you need, what kind of machines, what type of equipment, how much space do you need for freeways? Figure all that in, and see what you can do with it. Don't come up and say, okay, we need X number of square feet, we're gonna build it, and then we'll decide what we can put in there. Now, if you're faced with a situation where the square footage is already set, an area is here, this is where you're gonna develop the weight room, the strength conditioning area, if that's it, that's all you have, then work with that. But don't try to crowd everything that you can in there. Make sure that you leave space for individuals to move around. Aesthetics on this, now this may be something you don't think about, but again, you want that strength and conditioning area to be a warm, inviting, friendly kind of feeling. You want it to be a space where individuals feel comfortable when they come in there. Now, you don't want it to look like a torture chamber. Some of them are going to feel like it's a torture chamber anyway by the time they get out. But give it a warm feeling when they come in. Get invited. You guys are working with athletics. You're going to use a lot of stuff that's related to your college, your university, your school, your mascot, all those things. Make it a warm and inviting area when you come into it. So try to do that. You can do this with lighting, with furniture, finishes that you may have in there. The signage comes in to play in there. All those kinds of things. Anything that you can do to make it more inviting for them to come in. Another thing that's really good, I find this especially true for individuals that are working in cardiovascular. If you can, use outside lighting, outside scenery. Something that's nature oriented. And I'll tell you why. If any of you guys have ever been on a bike or a treadmill and you're on that thing and you're going and you're just looking at the wall. You're just looking at the wall. It's still there. Man, I've been on this thing. I'm about worn out here. 10 minutes. I got 20 minutes to go to get my 30 minutes in, and I'm just looking at that wall. If you can position it, if you've got the possibility of opening it up, placing it near a window so you can look outside, you can see nature, you can get natural light in there, that's gonna really help the feeling of the individual who's exercising. I mean, that's, for individuals who are working on cardiovascular and their own machines, that's one of the things I hear on a fairly regular basis is, man, I need to work on this, I enjoy working on it, but it's so boring. I'm just looking at the same thing. Take this lesson. One of the things, Peloton, is that the one? Peloton. Peloton was big, and now some others have jumped on the bandwagon. What's the big thing about Peloton?
Have live coaching.
Live coaching?
Interaction, different sceneries and stuff.
There you go. So what you're doing is now you're watching a monitor, which is where you guys are because you're used to doing it on your computer or your laptop. Hey, that's good, I can deal with that. But you're not staring at the wall anymore. So they've come up with a way, and they've marketed this thing, and they're selling them, and other companies are jumping on this now also, is that here you can see something, and it breaks up the boredom of exercising. You can accomplish the same thing if you can get some outside scenery. You may not be able to do that, but if you can, that's really going to help. Use colorful and consistently patterned wall signage. Don't have different colored signs, different shaped signs, different letters. It's confusing. If I see a sign and it's this color and the letter fonts is this size, I know what I'm looking for. I know what it is when I see it. You start changing things around, it gets confusing for people. Keep it simple. The information that you provide needs to be accurate and it needs to be concise. Keep it simple. The people are not going to stop to read a long sentence or a big piece of signage. Keep it simple, but be consistent in it, and that's going to help the aesthetics of the facility. And you need to provide that signage, so why not make it work for you? Let that help create a warm environment for you. You can use floor graphics, wall murals, anything to increase the visual impact of the facility. You guys do that in athletics. You put up your logo, you put up your mascot. Those are symbols on the wall. That's signage that you have that would work for you. Anything you can do like that to help it. Lighting is another thing. Make sure that you have adequate lighting. You make decisions about the type of lighting that you use, the amount of lighting that you have, but make sure you have enough lighting to keep things safe. You can also use lighting to create certain types of environment if you want to do that for visual impact. Fundamental designs, here's some things to think about here. Minimum ceiling height, 12 feet. That's kind of an industry standard. And that'll give you enough room to do anything. Nobody should be hitting the ceiling in there. Now, you can't play volleyball or basketball in there, but that's not what you're designing your facility for. Your facility's strength and conditioning. 12 feet minimum ceiling. Special surfaces. There should be such, as you see it, such as cushioned training surfaces, mirrored walls, and impact-resistant walls may be required. Mirrors. Mirrors in your strength and conditioning. Why do you have mirrors? Why do you have mirrors?
So people can watch their technique as they're doing exercises.
That's it. It's not because of ego, you like to watch yourself, you like to look at yourself, like to look at other people, whatever. It's so you can watch your technique. Now, if you just have someone, those mirrors aren't cheap, by the way. If you have someone to come in and install mirrors, they're gonna put the mirrors on the wall for you. They may not know how they need to be installed in terms of height and location, stuff like this. I was in a facility not too long ago where they had, mirrors had been put in, and the mirrors were at the floor level, started at the floor and went up. And I looked at that, and I said, first time I saw it, I said, it's just a matter of time before those mirrors are broken. And it wasn't a month later till I walked in there, and they were, what, 4-foot sections? One of them was broken. Okay, gotta call that in because we've got a dangerous situation here. Someone can get cut on that glass, whatever. Called the physical plant, they came down and it was glued to the wall, so they ripped it off the wall, broke it up in pieces and cleared it out. So I think we had 4 panels, so we have 1, 2, 3 sections of mirror. They're down to floor level, and we don't have anything over here. Gotta get that replaced. So the guy came in to replace it. He brought this big 4-foot panel of mirror in. He's gonna put it in there, and I got up there. He was gonna do it. He's up there, and he's gonna put it on the floor because he's gonna align it with the other 3 panels that are already there. I said, wait a minute, move it up. But it's not gonna be in line with the others. And I said, I know that, but it's not gonna get broken like these others are. So we ended up with 1, 2, 3, 4. But that one didn't get broken because nobody thought about it. Somebody's gonna bang that with a weight. Somebody will lay a plate against that and break it. So make sure that you move them up. So think about your mirror special surfaces that you might need. Designated areas for specific activities. We've kind of talked about that. You need an area for, depending on what you're doing, what your purpose is. If you're doing free weights, you need an area that's designated for free weights. That's what happens in this area. You need an area where you can do cardiovascular. You need an area where you can do machines, circuit training. Don't mix them all up because the people that are using them they have different objectives for being there. So separate those, and that's going to help dictate your flow pattern, utilities, everything else, your programming, all that stuff. So you separate those areas. 150 pounds per square foot floor capacity. Reduced noise. Again, we talked a little bit about that, keeping some areas a little bit soundproof so you can work on some things like that. Safety and security here. First of all, make sure that you meet all local, state, and federal health and safety codes. Again, that's going to be the design process. You have to keep up with that. You guys have to deal with one of those right now. You didn't have this a year and a half ago, but you have it now. We have COVID, boom, we got to deal with that. So suddenly you've got to change the way you're doing things in your strength conditioning facility because now you're dealing with COVID. Hopefully soon we'll get away from the mask, we'll be clear, we can go back to doing what we were doing before, or maybe doing something a little bit better. But right now, we have a special situation to deal with, so you've got to deal with it. Install sprinkler systems in your facility just in case, Install sprinkler systems for safety in there. Design facility to minimize trip hazards, slippage, electrical shocks, especially in your shower areas where you're gonna have water, your restrooms, entrance areas. I've seen so many entrance areas where you have a nice entrance area, but if it's raining, that terracotta, or that polished floor in there gets very slick very quickly. So you're gonna watch for that. Utilize technology. Again, you can control access to the facility, access to different parts of the facility. You can reduce theft in these areas. If you do use technology, which you are going to use some way or another in it, try to come up with ways or get software that will help prevent hacking, because hacking is going to be an issue for you. So these are some of the things. I'm running out of time. Dr. Briggs is going to put the rest of this on there. We have information on showers, locker rooms, toilets, office space, and storage space, so that information will be in there as well. But right now, I'm running out of time, so what questions do you have, concerns, comments, anything? Now, guys, it's dumped a ton of information on you.
Hope you also can.
And this is, let's put it this way. What I've given you is enough to hopefully get you thinking about things that you need to look at, and you're gonna have to dig and get the information for it. I didn't give you all the information, I couldn't give you all the information, but get you to think about some of the things. It's not just, hey, walk in there and put a weight machine here, put this here, let's go with it. No, there's a lot more to it than that. Next time you go into a strength and conditioning facility, next time you go into a weight room, stop for a minute and look at it. Take a good look at it and see. Do you see anything wrong with this? Is it set up? Is it functional? Can I move around safely in here? Is there enough room between the different pieces of equipment? What if I need a spotter? You know, can I move from strength to cardiovascular to circuit training with machines? Just look at it for a minute and see what you see. Anything?
I got a real world example I'll give you. I remember the first time I bought treadmills, the manufacturer was called Trotter. And each treadmill, although you would think they're standard sizes, the length and the width of those do vary. And I remember when we measured and then when they came, Trotter had changed the model and a new and improved model. It was slightly longer and slightly wider. So the space we were putting 6 treadmills in, to have enough space in between for guys like my size to walk in between them. When we got the 6 we received, because they were a little broader and a little longer, it actually forced us to send one back. We could only put 5 in the same spot. And the reason is we had to have enough space between the treadmills for people to walk in and out. And if you try to squeeze them together and somebody walks by and bumps the runner's gonna go flying off the treadmill.
Yeah.
Second thing we did is when we put them, when I arrived at this Y, they had the treadmills back against the back wall, and they were facing out away from the wall. And I remember within my first couple of weeks there, somebody had slipped on the treadmill and flung it backward, and they smacked into the back wall. And so I immediately hung padding because it was a concrete wall. And so I bought the really thick, like wrestling mats, a wrestling padding, and hung them behind the treadmills until we were able to actually move around. Eventually what I did was I turned them to face the wall. So the next person that went flying off, they'd fly off and hit the ground and not smack into the wall.
There's actually.
So those are all the kind of things you gotta read through.
There's actually an industry standard on the space that's required, not only beside the treadmills, but behind the treadmill as well. There's supposed to be, I think, 36 inches or so clear space behind the treadmill for people to come off the treadmill. And a lot of times people don't think about that. The average person doesn't know how to get on and off a treadmill. By the way, if you have treadmills, you may have to educate and train people on how to get on and get off a treadmill. They don't know how to do it. So, there's all kinds of examples out there. You're going to see things. So again, go looking for the specifics on these things and try to put together. You might have to eliminate a piece of equipment. You may be able to add this additional piece of equipment if you have room. But don't think that you have to just crowd everything in a space.
things we talked about here, when we talked about as far as anatomy, coming up with strength conditioning programs, like you said, unfortunately, you do have some people that are looking to have litigation against places, so you gotta make sure you take care of the legal issues, so you don't have that to come back and bite you.
I can say, I'll charge for
Well,
that.
perfect.
Okay, guys, thanks a lot, I've enjoyed, I wish we had more time, I mean, I wouldn't wanna take time away from the regular things you do in the class, but again, it's been fun to come in and share some things with you. And like someone said the other day, man, we covered a lot of stuff today. Yeah, we did, but trying to just hit you with some of this and get you to think about some of it. Take care of yourselves. You gotta take care of yourself, you gotta protect yourself, and nobody else is gonna do it for you. Okay, thanks, guys.